There's been lately quite a lot of talk about the war in the Middle East, the attack from Gaza to Israel, and now Israel is retaliating against Hamas and the Palestinians in Gaza, right? So I'm gonna suggest let's say, a long-term permanent solution to that conflict and take examples of other somewhat similar conflicts. And I'm not saying these solutions are per se good or bad. So I'm not taking a normative stance. I'm just saying there's a solution that is possible. And obviously, such a solution is not going to make everybody happy or everybody feel like it's fair, but it's just a solution. Anybody who knows history knows that things are generally not fair in the eyes of everybody. History is being made and written by the victors, those who are strong, those who dominate, those who've got ultimately military power. So whether it's right or wrong, whether you like it or not, that's the way it is. I'll take the first example, very recent, between Azerbaijan and Armenia, which is Nagorno-Karabakh. Now, that's basically an enclave. Nagorno-Karabakh is geographically inside of Azerbaijan. Now, Azerbaijan is Muslim majority, and Armenia is Orthodox Christian majority. So there's perhaps an ethnic slash religious divide between the two countries. And historically, there's a dispute, which is Nagorno-Karabakh, that used to be inhabited by Armenians inside Azerbaijan, right? And both claim that to be part of their territory. Now, Azerbaijan has got plenty of oil, so they've essentially gotten wealthier in the last 20 years or so. And they built up their military, and recently they just basically ran over the Armenian defenses in Nagorno-Karabakh. And they said, the locals, the Armenians who live there, said, okay, you've got two choices. You can stay here under Azeri rule, or you can leave. And most of them left because they were Armenians. So rather than to fight for their historical ancestral lands, they said, militarily, we can't hold them, so we lost them, so let's just get out. Another example is Finland and Soviet Union in the Second World War. Now, towards the end of the war, the Red Army was gaining ground, and they came through Karelia. And Karelia, for hundreds of years, has been inhabited by Finns, right? But when the Red Army was coming and crossing over Karelia, the Finns had a choice. Do we stay in our ancestral lands and accept that we'll be ruled by the communist Soviet Union, or do we pack up and leave? Which pretty much 100% they left. Now, was it right that the Azeris took Nagorno-Karabakh by force, or was it wrong? That's a question I'm not going to touch upon. Was it right that the Soviet Union took over Karelia from Finland? I'm not going to touch upon that topic. Then a third example is Northern Ireland. It used to be majority Protestant, so majority British, but the demographic projections are looking as though it's going to be majority Catholic, which eventually is going to mean it shall be united with Ireland. That simple. Now, is that good or bad? Not taking a stand on that. But the reason why that transition is possible is because it is a democracy. Both Britain and Ireland are democracies, and they, in the Good Friday Agreement, agreed that if it seems that there will be a majority supporting unification between North and South of Ireland, then they're going to hold a referendum, a border poll. So, is that good or bad? I don't know. I don't have a horse in that race. Now, these three examples lead us to what's currently happening between Israel and Palestine, which is that conflict has been going on since 1948, the creation of Israel, right? What is that? 75 years? And pretty much everything in terms of negotiations has been tried. Tested, failed, tried something else, tested, failed. So the reality is this. Israel is not going to basically, they're not going to give up their land. They're not going to give up their position. Militarily, they are overwhelmingly superior to the Palestinians. There's not even a question about that. All of the wars fought between Israel and its neighbors, Israel has won each one of them. And nowadays, it's even way more technologically advanced. It's a higher GDP, higher population, etc., plus the backing of the US, etc. So when it comes to military force, Israel is just way dominant over the Palestinians. Now, speculatively speaking, if the Palestinians had the military upper hand, what would they do? Well, the moderates would say, "Oh, let's negotiate and coexist." But let's be realistic here. That military power would be taken over by the more militant factions of the Palestinians, which means that they would essentially, to a degree, they would drive out the Jews. They'd say, "This land belongs to us, get out." Either at a barrel of a gun and say, on board that ship and get out, or they'll just shoot them down. So that's if the roles were reversed. Now, that's not going to happen anytime soon, right? So because negotiated solutions hasn't worked thus far and they're not going to work in the future, I would say the only solution is just basically driving out Palestinians out of Gaza and the West Bank. And the Palestinians out of Gaza, they'd have to be driven to Egypt, right? Egypt has got well past 100 million people who are Muslim majority and Arabs, just like the Palestinians. So for the Palestinians to integrate into Egyptian society, it's not that big of a deal, really. And Palestine is poorer than Egypt. So yeah, if Egypt wants to have plenty of cheap labor, there you go. Now, 3 million Palestinians going to Jordan. Jordan has got, a population of 10 million, give or take. That's going to be a bigger issue. However, those Palestinians could also be spread across the Arab world if they would accept those refugees. It's very unlikely that they would. And also Syria has been devastated by the civil war. None of the West Bank Palestinians want to go to Syria. Well, maybe a few. Lebanon, it's on the verge of bankruptcy for several years now. Nobody really wants to go there. Perhaps some, sure. But anyways, if you empty the West Bank, it's going to be Jordan, Lebanon, Syria. Saudi Arabia is not likely to take any of the refugees. Perhaps some of them try to go to Turkey. But these are basically the neighboring countries that have got the same ethnic background, same religion, etc. Culture is similar. So assimilating those Palestinians is going to be a lot easier. Now, when West Bank and Gaza are empty of Palestinians, which I'm not saying is good or bad, but that is a solution, because the current situation it just keeps going on like a perpetual motion machine. And then once those would be empty, then probably the Israelis are going to settle them to a degree. And then they would kind of guarantee permanent holding of those lands. Now, then the conflict is over, right? That simple. If, because obviously most people are not crazy enough to say, "Oh, let's just commit genocide." That would be just completely out of the question on a global scale. That's not going to happen. But forcibly or voluntarily moving people, that is within the realm of possibility. Borders have been shifted through history. Why do we pretend that in the 22nd part of the 20th century or the 21st century, borders are going to be fixed where they were in 1945 or 1960 or whatever? That's unrealistic. I would say as an addition to this, this is probably the first part of it. I'm sure if you're an Israeli, you'd say, "Oh, that's a great idea." And if you're a Palestinian, an Arab, a Muslim, like, "Oh, that's a horrible idea. You must be supporting the Jews." And I'm not. I don't have a horse in this race. The other part of it is that it is quite clear that certain forms of government and certain systems of running the society and certain cultures are more successful in providing welfare to its citizens on average. So when you have 2 million Palestinians in Gaza and 3+ million in the West Bank, and you've got 2 million inside Israel, if you ask any of those who live in Israel, the Palestinians, would you rather live as a Palestinian and most likely Muslim? Would you rather live as a citizen of Israel? Would you like to live in Gaza or the West Bank? I would say the overwhelming majority would say, "I'd prefer to live in Israel." Well, everybody kind of understands that Israel is the only Jewish majority state. So are the Israeli Arabs treated equally to the Jews? Well, not that much. So you would say I'm being discriminated against as a Palestinian inside of Israel, and you'd probably be right. However, the amount of welfare, stability, opportunities, education, healthcare, whatever, property rights, voting rights that you have as a Palestinian in Israel is way higher to compensate for the perceived freedom of living in Gaza, the West Bank. So, in essence, what I'm trying to say is Israel's way of governing and running society is providing more welfare than what the West Bank or Gaza is doing. Not to mention any of the neighboring countries, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, Egypt, etc. So inherently there's a difference in culture, right? And I would say that's just an example. Look at North Korea and South Korea. Same ethnic group, same religion. Well, not really, because communism is a religion and a totalitarian belief system. But North and South Korea, same ethnic group, but just a different system of government. And one part of those Koreas is providing way more welfare, opportunities, education, healthcare, technology, all of that good stuff, the good quality of life. And the other part is not doing that. Is it a question of how you run the government, how you run society, or the culture? I would say it's how you run the society. So there's inherently some forms of running society that are superior than others. And I think admitting that out loud is the first step in solving the problem. Just like look at Colombia and Venezuela. Now, Venezuela has got the biggest proven reserves of oil in the world. And look at the developments in the last 20 years, ever since Chavez came to power, and now with Maduro. So why is it that the flow of people is from Venezuela to Colombia? Although in terms of natural resources, and look at what Venezuela was like 50 years ago. It was like the richest country in Latin America. So inherently, we have to accept that their system of government, which is socialism slash communism, which is essentially a pretext for dictatorship, is not providing success, health. It's not providing welfare for the people or opportunities. So we have to admit that that is a worst way to govern a country. Same thing with Cuba. So when we look at the ways to govern a country, we have to admit there are superior and inferior ways of doing that. When you got war in Somalia, Afghanistan, Iraq, the people are trying to leave those countries to go where? To Europe. Why? It's not because people are similar to us there or they have the same ethnic group or religion. No, it's economic opportunity. So it is inherently, we have to admit that European countries are providing added value compared to the neighboring countries of Somalia, Iraq, Afghanistan, etc. If we don't admit that, we pretend as though oranges and apples are the same thing. So if we want to provide the maximum amount of welfare and ability to realize your dreams, if you want to put it that way, for a society, you have to apply a way to run society and government that is the most beneficial to the most amount of people. And I would argue we have to admit when it comes to systems that sound, let's say, good on paper, like communism, in practice, it never worked. It always ends up in misery, suffering, and death, basically. And any country that is applying the similar theocratic way of running society based on Islam, let's say in Saudi Arabia or Iran, is not exactly providing the most welfare for most people, bearing in mind that these countries got vast natural resources. And still, look at how they're run. I'm not saying they're not doing some things right. And obviously you can argue that, well, Iran is under sanctions, so that's why. However, look at what happened. I mean, sure, the Shah was pretty corrupt. But when you move from a corrupt Shah, supported by the US, to the revolution and what happens thereafter. It's not like suddenly their dreams came true. Quite the opposite. So I think there's a lesson to be learned. And this is probably something I would hope that the honest Palestinians would admit, that the way to govern a society, that the way Israel does it, is superior to what they're doing. And kind of for a second, just kind of put aside of like the whataboutism, like, oh, but they're, suppressing us and they're doing this. Yeah, great. But the way they run their government, like, look at Fatah, the Palestinian Authority. Is it doing a great job? Is it corrupt? It's not like you can look in the mirror and say we're doing all the right things and then they're kicking us in the teeth, right? So this was my quick rant on providing a solution to the Middle East. It's not a good or bad, but it would be a solution. It would be different from what you've done all the way up until now. Now, if that was the case, if that's exactly what the Israelis are kind of planning, to step by step just push the Palestinians out of Gaza, and then with their settlements in West Bank, they try to do the same thing in the West Bank. Is doing that slowly better than doing it quickly? Or is doing it slowly better in the sense that that's their aim, which I think is probably their aim, to liberate those areas for Jewish settlement? Are they trying to avoid a full-on war with Iran, with the other neighboring countries of the Middle East? Probably. Could they win that war? Yeah, I think it's quite likely because they've got nukes and Iran doesn't. Is it feasible or is it politically desirable to have a full-blown war in the Middle East and then you empty West Bank and Gaza and kind of you settle it once and for all? I don't know. But it seems to me it would be a lot easier if everybody would just look at a solution. And if 75 years doesn't provide any opportunities for a solution, then it's unilaterally, that's the way it's done. And this is, as a disclaimer, for example, what the US has done, the pretenses to go to war in Iraq, complete bullshit. Should they have done it? Absolutely not. It caused enormous amounts of suffering and casualties. It was a horrible war. That's fucked up. Should the US have gone to Afghanistan, just like the Soviets did? Of course not. That cost huge amounts of casualties, human suffering, and a ton of money. But it's not about like who's to blame more. Everybody's got to blame. But the world history works through power in the end of the day. Whether you like it or not, if you say that's toxic masculinity, well, boo-hoo, buttercup, suck it up. That's the way nature works, essentially. And sometimes, if you got reasonable people on both sides of the table, you can negotiate a settlement. You could negotiate the separation of Czechoslovakia into Czechia and Slovakia. You could negotiate Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland. You've been able to negotiate quite a bit of problems. But if it's impossible, then you have to use force. It's that simple. The result might not be to the satisfaction of a lot of people, but yeah, well, if that's the only thing you can do, then by all means. So, but what do you think? What is your solution to the current situations outside of politically correct platitudes? Let me know in the comment section.